English football finances are fucked with a capital F. This is United Inc. From No Question About That. I'm Ed and I'm with Jamie. Deary me, Jamie. That's the topic for today. We're going to talk about the state of English football finances. So often in the media, what it talks about really is like how much money there is in English football, how much money the Premier League spends on transfers compared to other leagues. What they forget to mention is just how much of a loss-making enterprise it is. We should rip football up, throw it in the bin and just put the money in the bank. That'd be a much more sensible way to use the finances. Anyway, Jamie, how are you doing?
Yeah, I am good. Equally dismayed by the state of English football finances. But can't complain. I am looking forward to Monday night when Manchester United finally return to competitive action. It does feel very strange, like just the 3-week gap or whatever it's been. It's felt like an absolute eternity, and yeah, football for United cannot come back soon enough.
There's only so much hate watching of Liverpool losing you can do. Although, to be fair, I've got quite an appetite for that. So that was quite delicious yesterday. Especially delicious. I know this is the finance show. We're not talking about football, but just because Slotter's moaned all season about teams not playing football. And then what did they do yesterday? 0 shots, 26% possession, hoofing it. Pathetic.
And I can't believe how little had been made of it, right? Like them going to a back five and literally just parking the bus and not really having any attacking output. I think the stat that I heard whilst watching it was they didn't have any shot on target in the second half. And I don't know if that was true for the whole game, but it felt like...
I thought it was true for the whole game. Yeah.
Well, I mean...
Maybe, yeah. What amazing thing is that they misplaced more passes than PSG. PSG made 3 times as many passes overall. Yeah. I mean, they are a very good side, PSG. Obviously, they're state-backed, and that has given them something of an advantage, especially in French football, so they can ease off during Saturdays, during the weekend, and focus on the Champions League, because there is basically no competition in French football. I said Premier League was fucked. French football's even worse state.
Yeah, I've been slightly hinting, well, I say more than hinting, about this on X now for a number of months. It has been coming. The latest set of numbers prove it to be true. And look, there's a lot of stuff going on there, but the fact that TV rights there are falling by about 80% is just a hammer blow for every team apart from PSG. And, you know, if you want to look into some of the governance there, well, you've got Nasser Al-Khalifi, who I think he's the chair of PSG.
Yeah.
He is also the chair of beIN Sports, the competitor, or one of the competitors for the media rights. And you know, they put in a bid recently for World Cup rights, which they were trying to put on the DTC platform, the direct-to-consumer platform that League One were doing, to basically take it away from League One. So he's, you know, putting the squeeze on the whole of the league there through his influence.
What's the point? I mean, part of the reason why French football doesn't have a TV deal is it's just not competitive, right? What's the point? And so you completely screw your rivals to the point that some of them will end up going out of business because the value of their TV deal is essentially zero. You know, I mean, they've had like hawk stuff going on, so they can win the league every year. Great. So what? Like, what's the goal here?
I mean, we've had a Super League put forward before, right?
Yeah, maybe that's what of course, maybe that's what they see their place in the world as, you know, just being a participant in the Super League. But it's not going to involve English football. And if it's not involving English football, what is it? A proper Super League? It'd be interesting. I mean, maybe they see that as the competitor to the Premier League.
Yeah, and look, I mean, Ligue 1 is already, I think, at least a third of the clubs are part of informal or formal MCOs.
That's right. And
so I guess from PSG's perspective, they're kind of like, you know, none of those clubs are the leading club of the MCO. So PSG may be like, well, it's not really a proper league anyway, because you might have a situation a bit like last season when Strasbourg could have qualified for the Champions League, but, mysteriously lost a few of their last games so that they didn't.
Yeah, it's all very dodgy. I mean, it's interesting to talk about MCOs. United and Nice haven't created that relationship at all. I mean, behind the scenes, who knows whether they're sharing any information, but it was put into a blind trust, so it seems unlikely. And there was the UEFA ruling, which I think ran out last September, on transfers between the two clubs. So Jim has reportedly been trying to sell the club, although I can't imagine you get too many buyers unless it was another MCO. I mean, we've had 6th Street buying into Sunderland Women this week. And so you've got private equity circling in various clubs around Europe. I think there's more than 200 clubs across Europe are part of an MCO in one form or another. US private equity has obviously been quite heavily involved in that, quite heavily involved in English football. I mean, it depends how you frame US private equity, but it's almost half the clubs now, basically. And there's not everyone can make money there, but I guess when you have, 6th Street are so big that their purchase into Sunderland is just like testing the waters, right? It means nothing essentially financially.
It's probably testing the waters, seeing what's going on, looking under the hood a little bit. I don't think it's going to be a particularly big kind of valuation play. And, Sunderland didn't really need to sell it in order to kind of meet the kind of PSR rules. So I think that's very much an exploratory deal. It'll be interesting to see how much they put into that women's team, or whether they kind of do their own women's MCO. There's a couple of funds out there trying to do a similar thing. Crux and Mercury 13 being two of the most prominent ones. But as far as I'm aware, they've not been sinking huge amounts of money into those clubs. It's kind of been Michelle Kang at London City Lionesses that's been doing that.
Yeah, it's the WSL is becoming more valuable, but it's still a fraction of the value of Premier League clubs, and the NWSL in the States will now be becoming less revenue generating than the WSL, I think, with the new TV deal. It depends how you balance it out. It's hard to say on standards, really. But yeah, Michelle Kang is obviously the biggest investor. Who else does she own? It's the New York City club.
And she also owns Lyon.
Lyon, that's right. Yeah.
Part of that wonderful Eagle Holdings MCO.
Yeah, Texter is, if you talk about like sharks, is that the right term for him? I don't know. I mean, he's failed everywhere, really. Crystal Palace, Lyon, Botafogo, I can't remember what other, there's another club in there somewhere. All right, we're going to talk about the Premier League, because I think almost all of the clubs have now published their accounts for 24-25. We talked about United a few weeks ago. Who are the headline names here? Chelsea are the one that stand out. What an amazing story Chelsea is. So, the private equity world. I know it fairly well. You would not normally do a deal. If you were looking at this just from a financial point of view, as a private equity holding, you'd look at this, the first 3 years of their holdings, and you go, we probably need to quadruple revenues in order to get the kind of return our LPs would expect on this kind of deal. They've lost money every single year. In fact, the only reason they didn't lose money in more money in 2 of those years is because they sold entities to themselves. So as a holding, as an asset, they've lost hundreds of millions, plus the purchase price, of course. What do you make of Chelsea?
I'll start with the more balanced view, which is if you view Chelsea, if you subscribe to the view that Chelsea sits as part of a broader portfolio, and there are learnings that you can take from the business side of Chelsea, whether that's the fans that are attending, whether that's like ticketing, etc., etc. There are potentially ways in which those losses could be offset elsewhere, kind of just using standard portfolio theory.
Sure.
On a standalone basis, these are absolutely incredible losses. And look, there are going to be a bunch of one-offs. So like the headline loss in terms of loss before tax was, in their accounts, was 262 million. In terms of what got submitted to UEFA, it was closer to 350 million in losses. Like, that is absolutely staggering. So look, as I mentioned, there are one-offs in there in terms of differences in amortization schedules. There's still some swap deals coming through, and they'll probably have some big write-offs for Sterling and Mudryk coming through. But there's no way that can explain the difference and bridge the gap to break even. And if we think about the settlement agreement that they've got with UEFA, because they broke UEFA's financial fair play rules, they've basically got to get themselves to break even within about 2 years. I can't see how they do it.
No, it looks very impossible. I mean, their theory of the case was completely different in English football, which is basically they could trade players to a profit, and they could buy all these young players on very low value contracts and then trade them around and make money that way. And so far, that has not been the case, right? In fact, actually, they've had to take some write-downs on or impairments on quite a few players who they bought, and it didn't quite work out. Now, you could kind of in theory make the case that that's a sensible strategy. Buy young players, improve them, sell them on for a profit. I mean, they have to sell them on, otherwise it doesn't really work, unless you keep them on low contracts for the full 8-year contract, which maybe was their view, because that happens in baseball, right? You sign a young player, you sign them on a very long contract. Suddenly they're a great player on a low contract and there's nothing the player can do. Maybe that's what they thought. But then you get, people like Enzo Fernandez complaining that he's not on a market rate wage and agitating for a move and so on and so on. And I can't see any world in which Real Madrid actually pay the 100 million, 105, I think it was, that they paid Benfica, who, by the way, had bought the player for 15 million 6 months earlier. Yeah, it's just really hard to look at this and go, hey, yeah, that was great strategy. And I mean, I suppose you could think about it in portfolio, or you could think about it as a kind of roll-up if you're going to buy other distressed assets. This is what private equity would do. And maybe there's some efficiencies there if they buy more clubs. Data, player transfers across the group. We've seen quite a few transfers between Chelsea and Strasbourg, including the manager. God, I mean, it doesn't. I couldn't make a case for it right now. Maybe they're taking a very long-term hold, and over a 10 or 15-year hold, it will make sense. But right now, it looks like a disaster.
Yeah, and I think the point on the player trading model, I understand the theory of it, but I think the challenge is, historically, a lot of the player trading profits that Chelsea have generated have been from their academy players. So they bought players when they're, I don't know, anywhere from 8 to 15. They put them through the process of Chelsea's academy, and then they turn into 20, 30, 40, 50 million pound players. They've now sold so many of those academy players that they don't actually have many. So then all of a sudden you are falling onto your squad list, and they're now down to a position where I'm not sure they really have that many excess players. And if they don't pull up trees either somewhere else on loan or in your first team, and they're not qualifying for the Champions League every season, you've then got a huge issue, because you've just got no way, you've got no real recourse of undoing that mistake. You've just got to ride it out, which will mean that you're ultimately failing squad cost rules, etc., for multiple years. I think there are some merits to what they've done on their wage structure, in terms of the idea of having it heavily incentivized. So that does de-risk the model, but it also adds quite a lot of volatility.
They will show next year a pretty sharp increase in profits, I imagine, because of that World Cup stuff. Club World Cup will all filter through. I don't think that was in the 24-25 accounts, was it? Or part of it, maybe. I can't remember.
Part of it, somewhere around about a third of the prize money probably would have been recognised in these sets of numbers. But then you've also got the bonuses that they paid out, which I believe was like 15, 20 million, something like that. It worked out £1 million a player. So, how much of that translates to the bottom line is another question.
Yeah, and let's say win a European trophy in the next 2 years, they're not going to be in the next one.
Yeah.
Assuming that FIFA... We should talk about the World Cup later, because bloody hell. Yeah. Who else? How are Arsenal doing? Arsenal are in pretty good shape, honestly. They are likely to win the Premier League this season, although City game coming up, and that would be assuming City win their game in hand, then Arsenal and City play at the Etihad, and that's only one win in it at that point. So it's kind of fairly squeaky bum time if you're little Mikel Arteta. They're in good shape in the Champions League, I guess, but financially they're in pretty good shape as well. They've obviously become a much higher spending club than they once were. I think a lot of people think that they're still Arsenal sort of value, but they are paying big wages now. Anyway.
I think if you're looking at it purely financially, they're in a decent shape. If you look at it from the perspective of the regulations and squad cost rule, they've got a bit of headroom, but not lots. And I think over the next few years, they're going to have a lot of difficult decisions to make. So, when is the right time to sell certain players, and can they actually command decent fees for them? Because, look, even though they are top of the league, have they really got a squad where you can say, compare it to, say, PSG, where they've got players that can turn a game, just out of nowhere? I'm not really too sure.
Well, they went for depth in the transfer market rather than quality. So you look down the list, they do have 2 players for every position, basically.
Yeah.
And it's likely to win them the Premier League. But yes, in one-off games, do they have the brilliant players that can change it? No. Even Saka's fallen off a cliff this season in terms of his numbers.
Yeah.
And so, yes, you're right. Could they sell some of those players at a large profit? They'd have to sell the headlines, right? They'd have to sell Rice or Saka really to make really big money. They, in accounting terms, I think they made a tiny loss, but not much. So they're in pretty good position. Liverpool's an interesting one because obviously they made this absolutely massive spend in the summer, and their performances have been a disaster. Slot may get fired in the summer as a result. It depends how. But FSG have been pretty patient, I would say, generally in terms of how they think. So, but the Liverpool fans, at least those who are online, are agitating somewhat. And if they don't make the Champions League, which will be 5 teams for sure next season, then that's going to be fairly difficult in terms of what they did in the summer transfer spend. Their amortization will be very high next season. Their wages are obviously pretty high, although Mo Salah drops off. They're still going to have to replace him. They're going to have to replace Van Dijk at some point, who has become, I don't know what the polite term is, utterly shit compared to what he once was. I do find it funny every time he's turned inside out by a forward again, or forgets to track a run. He's not the player he was.
No, totally. They're one of the clubs that did manage to turn a reported profit. That was entirely driven by their player trading profits.
Yeah.
And yeah, look, I think their biggest issue is long-term squad building and planning, right? The fact that they are spending so big on specific, on 1 or 2 players just means that if they don't work out, the risk to that is significant. Mm-hmm. They're buying players for the types of fees whereby there is no resale value.
Yeah.
At best, they would break even. And to your point, whilst they've got some, players on big wages, they're going to have potentially equally big replacement costs on top of that. So they're going to be going a little bit like us, going through this cycle of pretty large transfer spend. And that is going to have an implication in terms of their squad cost rule. I don't think they have any real chance of breaking it. But if they're spending too much on too many players, that's when they're going to start to come into problems.
Yeah, well, that 450 something million pounds of spend last summer is going to work its way into next year's accounts. If they're out of the Champions League, the squad cost ratio rule is going to be tight for them, presumably. I mean, it depends. They bought that young Italian kid, which I whose name I forget, who did his ACL like in 3 minutes inside of joining the club. Yes. Maybe he was supposed to be Van Dijk's replacement. Obviously, Isak has had a difficult start and then broke his leg. Unfortunate for him and Liverpool, obviously. But you're right. They're never going to sell him for 120 something million, right? So they're just eating that cost, right? That's the kind of deal that United have done so many times. And if it doesn't work out, it compounds, doesn't it? Right? Loss on the way in, loss on the way out. If you decide to sell,
totally. And this is one of the things that kind of really irks me. I think about the discourse about, if you're not spending big, you're not showing ambition. No, I think you're actually showing restraint and you're showing long-term. Well, arguably, you're showing long-term thinking. The way that these rules work, I've said it before and I'll say it many times again, long-term squad planning is going to be one of the key differentiators in terms of how you manage your finances. And just spending big, we can come up with 100 examples where that has not resulted in sustained success. The reality is football's a zero-sum game. So, if everyone spends big on player wages and transfer fees, all you're doing is just adding inflationary pressure to the market. And that's what all of the club's results are showing. And
PSL was supposed to do that, though, right? Well, it was supposed to restrain the clubs, and UEFA's even tighter, right? It's supposed to restrain the clubs. In some ways, the squad cost ratio rules that are coming in, which more or less match UEFA, not exactly, are supposed to create an even longer term view of sustainability. You can't just sell Elliot Anderson to make this year's accounts work. For example, transfer fees that you receive are spread out over 3 years, and in fact, you can only spend 70 or 85% of those, or up to 115% on a 1 year basis. But then that is clawed back, right? So it does create this view that you should think about squad management in a much more sustainable way, or at least a longer term view. Like these one-off juicing of your accounts should stop now, at least in theory. I mean, I guess there's still desperate times and all of that, but they just won't realize that transfer straight away. So, and there is some kind of debt type regulation in there as well, which won't impact United as well. I mean, it's not going to result in a points deduction at United. They'll have to think about how they play with debt and so on. I don't know. In some senses, at the bottom of the league, given that there won't be in UEFA competitions, it doesn't reduce the inflationary pressure, really, right? They're going to be getting more money in than they can spend. And so you're still going to have this world in which Bournemouth can spend more on a transfer than AC Milan or something like that. And they're all going to be chasing the dream, of course. At the top of the league, 70% rule, there's going to be quite a few teams that are going to be nudging on that. United will be around about there. It will impact how they think in the summer and so on. So, but if you took the whole of English football, I don't know that squad cost rules are going to suddenly turn English football into a profitable enterprise.
No, look, I think squad cost rule ultimately should put a limit on inflationary pressures of wages and transfer fees, right? However, because the penalties for breaking it in England are not that significant, people are just going to keep spending more. And look, the reality of that situation is like local owners or, local businessmen that have done good, they've already been priced out of the market for football clubs. Look at what's happened to Salford City. The class of 92 had to write off about 32 million quid to facilitate new investors coming in to keep the club afloat and solvent. So you're seeing that up and down the pyramid. That then means, investors are coming in, and then, we as fans sometimes complain about ticket prices and clubs losing their soul. Well, maybe we should probably think about that mentality about
buy.
Urging, just to spend as much as possible, because there are too many examples across European football and even in England that you're seeing now where that relationship doesn't hold. And, we've never had as many tools to drive revenue as much as possible. We've never had as many tools to make more informed decisions about why clubs are buying players. I know it's not easy, and I know there is almost like an English tax. If you're trying to buy a player abroad, the price automatically goes up 20, 40%, whatever. But I think English football in general needs to really consider that. But if you've got, if you're lucky enough to have a wealthy backer, then doesn't matter. We'll just keep spending, because ultimately they will cover the bill. And I just don't think that's healthy.
No, it's not. And what it's created is a scenario where the EFL and the Premier League are at loggerheads. They still haven't come to a deal on revenue sharing. The EFL want 25%. Gary Neville's been quite vocal about that. It's obviously he's not a neutral commentator on this. If I was the Premier League chairman, one day, Sir Jim, I'm coming for you. Honest. If I was a Premier League chairman, I'd have two thoughts. One is I want to keep as much revenue as I can, because I'm selfish, of course, and every club looks out for themselves, and they have a financial duty to do that, of course. But also, I don't trust you guys, right? I give you 25% of my revenue. You're going to spend it all and more and still make a loss, and then you'd be coming to me for even more of a handout. I'm kind of paraphrasing how EFL Premier League chairman will think, right? And owners will think. And of course, because there's been even less financial control in the EFL, especially in the Championship, where everyone is chasing the dream and everyone spends more than they earn, basically. And many, many clubs spend more just on wages than they earn. And the only way they're sustainable is by owners putting in money. Just look at Sheffield Wednesday, right? We can say was a disaster of an owner, but he's going to end up writing off like 50 million quid that he put into that club, right? It would have been even more of a disaster at Sheffield Wednesday, one of the old clubs, of English football. Great ground, Hillsborough. It's falling apart now, apparently, but I always enjoyed going there. And that's just not sustainable. So if I was the Premier League looking at handing over £1 billion every 3 years, I would be saying, hey, you have to have really tight financial controls here. And of course, EFL chairman, owners will be going, actually, no, we want to chase the dreams. As much as the loggerhead on the deal is about the total value, I bet it's about financial controls as well, because everyone can see the prune juice flowing.
Totally. And look, with everyone, I think it was the Gillingham CEO that kind of used this chasing the dream terminology. With everyone doing that, it just becomes an arms race. And at some point, an investor is going to look at it and be like, why am I buying this? And, based on what I know, there are a lot of sophisticated investors that are almost doing that. They're looking lower down the league pyramid because they're just like, it's a money pit that it's not immediately obvious where I can find an edge to outperform everyone. And when that happens, there is a question is, do you get a de facto closed league, right? Because if eventually everyone runs out of money or they can't find someone to buy them when they're a distressed asset, whoever's in the Premier League then effectively get what they might want by default. And so I think, look, as I say, we've said squad cost rules should help alleviate this a little bit. the independent football regulators focused on solvency, I think, is a great thing. However, it still doesn't solve everything.
No, the football regulators, I think, is the way it's framed, is really looking at edge cases rather than like the overarching, like this is how you it is not, as of yet, mandated to impose financial regulation on the whole of English football, right? They're looking at disastrous cases, disastrous owners, what you can and you can't do. We will see, right? It's also quite underfunded, I think, as a regulator. I mean, all regulators are. Yeah. And I bet you any money, there'll be quite a lot of capture there, right? You just watch the flow of people coming out of clubs into that football regulator and the revolving door there. I will be looking for that for sure. It happens at every regulator, right? I mean, I used to work in the telecoms market. A couple of FCC chairman back was the, in fact, actually, Ajit Pai, the last one, was ex-Verizon lawyer. The one before that, Tom Wheeler, was, I think, ex-Verizon or AT&T, and maybe both, right? I mean, you get this in all industries. I'm not familiar with every single industry, but I bet the same is in banking and oil and gas and so on and so on and so on, right? Yeah. Where is the expertise? I was in that industry. I think we'll see that as well. And so does the regulator have teeth to actually impose rules? I mean, in theory, they've got a parliamentary mandate. In reality, will they be able to actually police it?
Well, yeah, I think so there's one thing that they have, I think they've stated this, but there's going to be a license requirement. So in order to get a license, you have to pass through the IFR's tests, financial tests. And that's where the solvency test comes in. So you have to provide proof that whatever business plan you've got, you can fund it. So that should stop the likes of, or I say stop, it should reduce the chances of like a Sheffield Wednesday happening. But
although it doesn't. He did fund it and then he turned off the tap, and the same at Derby, right? And like that's the real problem, right? Yeah, I've got the money until I decide I don't want to do it anymore.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that, we as fans really need to be conscious of. And we talk about competitors here, but, there's a question around Newcastle on that exact point, right? Like, It's all well and good being owned by PIF and, having Cristiano Ronaldo cleaning the boots, as the song goes. But if they're not going to fund it ad infinitum, you've still got to improve your underlying operations in order to make this work.
Yeah. Oh, well, Newcastle a really interesting case, really, because Eddie Howe is out there in every press conference moaning that he can't spend the money he wants. But Newcastle would never have been in a position to spend the money he wants. But for state ownership, there's still a question over the ground, whether they're going to move from St James's. I mean, I think they wanted to take a space up at Lees Park. That's going to make it, that's just slightly north. St James's, if you've ever been there, I don't like to praise Newcastle at all, but it's great because you walk 5 minutes from the train station. It's right in the city centre. So that's, and Newcastle's it is a great town. But like if they want to grow, they probably have to build this new stadium because that's really their only route to and they've got great, it's a one club town. They've got great potential demand there. You can kind of make a bull case for how they could possibly do this, but PIF are going to have to spend £1 billion on a brand new stadium. In the current environment, are they going to want to do that? It's kind of interesting because it's wrapped up with Saudi strategy overall, Vision 2030 and what they're doing with the Saudi Pro League. There's currently some issues in the Middle East, you may have noticed, that may cloud their thinking. Newcastle's a very small part of their portfolio, I guess, but they will have seen over the 3 years that the Premier League had learned a lesson of what happened with Chelsea and then Manchester City and kind of clamped down on their ambitions somewhat.
Yeah, and I mean, look, the latest set of results that they published, one could claim that they are now part of the cartel because they sold their stadium to themselves. which, well, to a PIF owned entity. And, you got to ask the question, like, okay, so was this all worth it? Right? Like, they now don't own their stadium. And, I think Newcastle explained it as a reorganization of their property portfolio in advance of, redevelopment or building of a new stadium. Well, you didn't have to sell it to a PIF-owned entity. You could have done that under the existing corporate structure of Newcastle as a football club. And, it's then, because you don't really need to do that, as far as I'm aware, in order to fund a new stadium. Like, if it's going to be PIF funded,
they have the cash there, right? That's not
exactly
a problem. I mean, it always is alarm bells start going off when owners start selling stadiums to different entities in the group, because if you get a transfer of ownership, it causes real problems. We saw that at Coventry, saw that at Derby. I think there's many other cases where that creates a problem around, okay, well, we've decided it's no longer for us, but we keep control of the stadium, or we don't. Is it as one package? I mean, even Chelsea would complain about this because it's very different, but Ken Bates sold the Chelsea stadium to Chelsea pitch owners, which means a separate entity gets basically a golden share and a vote over what happens with that stadium. They've been trying for years to get out of that stadium, which is in a very cramped part of Chelsea, and they can't really expand. It's not really in Chelsea, actually. It's in Fulham. But, they don't like that. A very nice part of London, of course, but they tried to move to Battersea Power Station. That didn't work. It's now a shopping centre. They've tried to move to Earl's Court. That hasn't happened yet. They have a separate entity controlling their future, right? Because what is a club without its stadium?
It's one of the main reasons that a lot of these private equity houses are getting involved in football clubs. It's the idea about what can be done with a stadium and the land surrounding it. So, potentially problematic. Let's wait and see.
We didn't talk about City. I mean, City's so weird. I mean, I was just looking at their wages are like off the chart. I mean, they made in theory a small loss, but like, I don't even know how to like talk about City. Like, we're still waiting on 115 charges. They are still, I mean, a huge amount of their commercial revenue, which is, really big, of course, is Mideast related, effectively related parties. They fought those rules on every possible level at every turn, of course. Yeah, SCR won't be a problem for them, I assume. In some sense, they're a very well-run club. They magically buy players in and then sell youth players for the same amount, magically, every time. But of course, none of this would have happened but for, one, the absolutely rampant and massive cheating. I think I can say this. I'm always... I got accused, by the way, on Twitter the other day. Someone quoted the rules around libel, slander in this case, because it's broadcast.
Yeah.
And you can't accuse them of cheating. And they'd sent cease and desist letters to people. I'm based in the States. If they want to take me to court, bring it on, because discovery rules are going to be fucking magical, I mean, First Amendment doesn't mean I can say anything, but the fact that they were punished by UEFA gives cause for talking about cheating, right? Many people would think that was cheating, and so did UEFA. Anyway, that's always fun. Jamie, what would you say about this?
They tend not to analyse and make too many comments about Man City's finances because of the ongoing case.
Yeah.
It's very obvious how their finances work, and their MCO structure allows them to have a slightly lower operating cost base. They're recording a lot of revenue, therefore they can spend a lot on transfer fees and wages, etc., etc. But I don't see much value making too many comments whilst the case is ongoing, and there's plenty of people who have plenty to say about the case. I don't think I'm going to add much value there. It's
going to be a very exciting day when we finally get that report published. in 2037 or whenever they get round to actually doing it. Although, of course, on our last pod, we talked about what happened with Chelsea, which was basically a slap on the wrist. And it seemed like the biggest plus for them, or the mitigation, was the fact that they fessed up. And so maybe City will get punished for fighting it all the way, but their alleged crimes are on a hugely different scale. So, all right, state of English football, man. It's not in a great shape, and in a sense, it's because they've got so much money. I mean, would they be in better shape if it wasn't like this? I don't know. I mean, as you said, it's an arms race, and that dictates everything. We've got 20 clubs competing against each other. If you're in European football, you think even wider than that.
Yeah.
And everyone is chasing those profits, but it's very hard to get hold of, or they're chasing the dream, right? They're chasing victory, and they know everyone else is going to spend, so they're forced to do it too. No one is actually making profits. Maybe not even Tottenham.
Well, no, Tottenham's
actually, they will because they've been in the Champions League this year. So.
I mean, we haven't touched on Tottenham, but I would describe it as everyone is chasing revenue. But the phrase that I'm increasingly using to describe this is football's prisoner's dilemma. Anyone that is not familiar with game theory, economic game theory, is the idea that if you don't do something, someone else will, and that will better them more than it will you. So you both do it, and it results in no change. And that's literally...
If we robbed a bank, Jamie, I'd blame you. Yeah, that's the prisoner's dilemma. Unfortunately, I have a degree in economics, so yeah, very familiar with reading textbooks on that. Yeah,
exactly. And that is simply all we're seeing. And, and now Spurs, I've coined them as the new United in terms of their finances. I think there will probably be a time, not right now, but at some point in the future, where we may look back on the removal of Daniel Levy for whatever depending on what the reason was, if that ever actually comes out. But removing him was akin to David Gill and Sir Alex Ferguson leaving United. He had his fingerprints on everything. That's a huge void to fill. And look, they've been spending more cash than they generate. They have huge transfer debts. The difference is they've got an owner who can foot the bill and who will foot the bill. But, they've declared that they're going to be spending more money. As we've said, that guarantees you nothing, apart from maybe you're going to make more expensive mistakes because everyone knows you're spending. And I think the biggest issue is the whole positive business case around, or investment case around Tottenham is they've got this new stadium. It generates a load of revenue and is extremely profitable. If you actually look at their latest set of accounts, and this was the analysis that I did a few weeks ago, the operating costs that they've got, which aren't wages, have risen to £200 million. It rose by around about 40 million. Mm-hmm. If you look at their commercial income, the growth in that only grew by, I think it was 25 to 30 million. So even if you subscribe to this view that other costs, and we don't have enough disclosure on it to know exactly what it is, but even if you subscribe to the view that that's, the costs of putting on all of these NFL events or concerts, etc., it tells you that it's not as profitable as people think.
Mm-hmm.
And so then you're kind of like, okay, whilst it gives you more money to spend on wages, effectively you're almost just building this kind of big black hole of funding requirements.
Yeah. It's going to be very interesting next season with Roberto De Zerbi playing tippy-tappy football in the Championship. Spurs will publish their accounts. It'll look amazing. They'll be in they may even beat United in terms of the headline numbers. Unclear exactly, but it's probably right. But of course, the year after, the actual reality on the ground of them being in the Championship will be a unmitigated financial disaster, or in fact mitigated because the Joe Lewis Foundation, because he no longer owns it, honest gov, will have to foot some of that bill and bridge the gap there. But that's going to be interesting, isn't it? Have we covered all the top six? Sort of, yeah. Didn't talk about United, but we've done that many times before.
Villa,
yes. Very deep pockets, their owners. Very deep pockets.
Yeah, and they seem insistent until very, very recently that they would only fund player transfers and wages. I think it's close to 700 million that they've put in. All well and good, but they've only started doing infrastructure investment now. That's been a possibility to them for quite some time. And I think they are, alongside Chelsea, they are the most exposed financially to not getting into the Champions League in terms of causing them further issues on financial regulations.
Yeah, absolutely. I think they spent, I can't remember what the exact number was in terms of wages to revenue. It may have been close, touching 100%. Maybe not last season, the season before, right?
Yeah, so the season before was, I think, over 100%. I think this season they may come in around 90-ish%. So they've come down, but that's a result of the fact that, UEFA said to them, cool it, folks, on the transfer spend.
If you comment on this on Twitter, which I'm sure you have done, you'll get a lot of very chippy Villa fans who've gone straight down the conspiracy theory route.
I've got into a healthy debate, I think, with a Villa fan who actually works within the sports industry at a reasonably high level. And the argument that comes back is that, the club doesn't have any debt and they're being told that they can't spend even though their owners want to. And, the point that I made a few months ago and will continue to make is you've had a 10 million euro fine for the amount that you have spent on wages, and you've been one of the, alongside Chelsea, broken the rules by the largest amount. It's not that big. It's not that much of an issue for you. And we made this point earlier. All that UEFA are basically doing is softly imposing a cool down period on transfer activity, which is akin to an owner saying, sorry guys, we can't fund the transfer window this year. It's not that bad. And the 10th largest wage bill in the world, you have to
at
seriously.
Aston Villa. Yeah.
Exactly. At Aston Villa, the thing that I will always come back to is their long-term squad building, right? They've spent so much that then when they want to make the next step, they don't have the headroom to do it. And whilst it's been great for us and, shedding some cost off our P&L and also, saving on cash, the fact that they spent or paid 75% of Marcus Rashford's wages and nearly 85% of Jadon Sancho's wages on loan, I do not understand the rationale behind that.
Well, yes. I think the net worth of their owners is $20 billion or something like that. And so they have very deep pockets in theory. And of course, what Villa fans want is for them to splurge it all on the club. But they should also think long term that is not sustainable. I mean, the infrastructure piece is really interesting because, of course, that's a classic old stadium. They can't just suddenly knock Villa Park down and build a 80,000 seater and suddenly become one of Europe's elite. They can tinker at the edges, which is what they're going to do, basically. Yeah. Right. So
yeah.
Their pathway to massively increasing revenues is a little challenged, at least on the match day piece. I guess, squeeze fans like everyone else does in this game. Talking of which, before we go, a big piece in the Athletic on World Cup tickets. Everyone's, I'm sure, been following just how insanely expensive they are at the moment. Let's see for some of the less attractive games what actually happens as we approach. I think there may be some cheap on the day tickets for, I don't know, Egypt versus Iran. May have maybe a little bit challenged. But big piece in the Athletic yesterday was about people buying tickets in categories. So FIFA sell not your specific seat, as many US sports fans are used to paying really high prices. I mean, they are astronomical generally.
Yeah.
But you get a seat. You know where you're sitting. FIFA sold it in categories. People bought category 1 tickets. Turns out they moved the categories around so they could put the FIFA pitchside lounge and the trophy lounge and whatever. And so people thought they were getting category 1 tickets, which they thought would be in great spaces, and they turn up being in the nosebleed seats in category 1, which is suddenly on the fourth tier of the SoFi Stadium. People very angry about that because they feel like they've been duped, paying hundreds and hundreds of dollars for not very good tickets. It doesn't half feel like FIFA have taken rinsing supporters to the ultimate level.
Yeah, I actually hadn't read that article, but I saw the headline, and I kind of guessed what it was about.
You can guess, yeah. Every single layer of it. I mean, Adam Crafton was reporting. He's been doggedly on this. This was Henry Bushell in the Athletic, but Adam Crafton also on. It's not just the tickets; it's also parking. At some stadiums, like the MetLife in New York, you cannot get there by public transport, so you have to either get a taxi, which will be astronomically expensive, or drive, and parking tickets are like 75 quid or whatever, $75. Or in Boston, it's not in Boston, it's like 30 miles outside of Boston in the suburbs. They've increased the train fare 5 times its normal rate. So it'll cost you $75 to take the train from Boston out to Foxborough. The tickets are also extremely expensive. There's also not enough capacity on those trains. I think there's capacity for like 20,000 fans out of the 80,000 that'll be going. You can't park anywhere. If you do, it's really expensive. So you're faced with what? Walking 30 miles? Scotland are playing twice there as well. I think England once. It's going to be an absolute shit show.
Yeah, that is like, I knew this was going to be expensive. And like I've gone to kind of many international tournaments and really, really enjoyed them because of the almost like carnival atmosphere that you get with the kind of melting pot of fans. And all of these things they just leave a really sour taste in the mouth because it's, it put me off even applying for tickets just because it's like, you do feel like you're getting the shirt ripped off your back. And, if you're then, say you are a Scotland fan, and look, I hope they do really, really well, but they could feasibly lose all 3 games and you'll be spending thousands upon thousands of pounds in order to just go and watch and experience that. I'm like that. There's something that isn't great there. And, look, I know FIFA will put the argument that, it's all going back into the game. I'm like,
follow the money on that one, man.
Yeah.
All going back into local officials' pockets who then vote for Gianni Infantino is a way you could put it if you were extremely cynical about what the FIFA model looks like. Doesn't half look like Amway or some kind of pyramid scheme. I mean, the whole thing just feels so corrupt. You wouldn't have believed that it could get more corrupt after Sepp Blatter left, but it's in a different way. Sure, I don't know how. I mean, Gianni Infantino, it's all kind of public. There's been reporting on just how much he gets in salary and bonuses, and he gets his apartment paid for. He bought a $8,000 mattress at one point and so on. I'm sure he's doing very well out of the current cycle. But it's, the other thing that about this particular World Cup, aside from the prices, of course, it has been quite highly politicized. That is going to be an issue. You've had, obviously, the White House suggesting they may take games away from certain cities that they don't like their policies of. You've also had this fight between FIFA and the federal government around who's going to pay for things like security and FanFest, and the local officials don't want to pay for that because they're not getting anything back, right? So you've had a whole bunch of local, and you talked about the carnival atmosphere, right? They're cancelling the FanFests. What carnival atmosphere is there going to be?
Yeah.
I mean, you'll get Dutch fans or English fans or Scotland fans or whoever at the local bars and restaurants, of which, by the way, in big cities, they're going to be paying through the nose. Get used to it, guys.
Yeah.
I go back to London. London's a very expensive city. I'm doing a whole tour of the UK this summer. I go to anywhere, but even London, right? Expensive. Go there.
Yeah.
Feels really cheap. I'm like, I'm rich. Everything's half price. Yeah.
Yeah.
I suppose Gianni should be doing what every other US service employee does and ask for a 25% tip on top as well.
Yeah. I mean, like I went to, look, I know there was a lot of consternation about the Qatar World Cup and how that got awarded and, you know, all the issues surrounding that. Appreciate it. But I went to that World Cup, and when you were on the ground and when you were there, it was
fan friendly, that one, yeah.
Yeah, it was different, but it was very fan friendly. And like the idea that I could go and watch at least 2 games a day, we didn't quite squeeze in 3, but we could have done on some days. There was a carnival atmosphere, you know, as you were going through some of the, you know, the kind of, you know, there was one night that I still remember where you had like Argentina fans, I think maybe Mexico fans, and some other fans from Europe kind of taking it in turns, singing songs. And you're like, okay, I actually feel like I'm at a World Cup. I just can't imagine that that's, you know, you're even getting anything close to that in this time round.
Yeah, no, it's, yeah. Anyway, on that cheery note, if anyone needs a room in Seattle, we have a spare room in the basement. It's based on an apartment here. We can negotiate on price.
I was going to say, what, available for $2,000 a night? Oh, okay, sorry.
No, we did actually think of putting it on Airbnb, and then we were like, dude, I don't know. We had a scenario of a whole bunch of Aussies turning up and trashing the place, so you can imagine. All right, we'll leave it there. English football. Yeah, the arms race continues, and it's had its effect on the finances, I'd say. All right, Jamie, thank you very much. Listeners, viewers, you can find us on YouTube if you'd like to see our beautiful faces. You can find us on patreon.com/NQAT pod, NQAT or NQAT pod, if you'd like to get the bonus show, or on Apple Podcast subscriptions. We appreciate it. Find Jamie's Substack, The Director's Inbox, or Subprime Goals, both, either or, on Substack. And I write occasionally. I should put something out this weekend on NQAT pod as well. See you next time.
Thanks a lot.